Well, hello. It's very good to be with you. We're going to start a new chapter this week. We're going to turn to chapter 6. We spent several weeks on chapter 5. However, we're going to start new. We're not going to do review. I'm not going to spend the time on 5 because we have plenty to deal with today. I'm going to say right at the beginning, this is a controversial passage. There's a lot of very messy things we can get into. It's not the easiest. It's again why I believe in the expositional message of going through these passages. But I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the truth. I had to wrestle with this. And I'm also going to say I encourage us to be friends, to search it out. I'll give you my thoughts. I encourage you to think about it yourself. And just to kind of dip our toes in the water before we look at the passage, the title is called Being a Servant. This idea of a servant. That's a very, well, in my mind, a very negative connotation. I don't know about yours. So that's just starting to get our way into this passage. The way we're going to cover it is I'm going to read it. We're going to think about it. We're going to look at some context. Then we're going to dig a little deeper. Then we're going to try to apply it in the immediate context and a broader context. But, I like to give you a little warning. It's not, there can definitely be some very hard things to think about in all this. Well, let's jump in. Let's read it. All right, picking up where we left off, 1 Timothy 6. Let all who are under a yoke as bondservants regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and the teaching may not be reviled. And those who have believing masters must not be disrespectful on the ground that they are brothers. Rather, they must serve all the better, since those who benefit by their good service are believers and beloved. So, what are your first thoughts? I just had to kind of sit and ponder this for a while, even before I did research. So I'm actually going to take you through my own journey. And you may have, we have bondservant here, we have term masters here. There's a lot going on. And so if I just jumped in and said this is easy and it obviously means this, I think that's, in my mind, would be a little disingenuous for me, because for me, I had to wrestle a little. And so I'm going to share with you my process. And this is the first thing I thought about. I thought about this broader context. So the whole passage to me speaks to being a servant of different types, and there are different types. And I'm not saying I am a professor of history here. I did some research, I did some self-reflection, I thought about things maybe I haven't thought about for a while, even from prior times I've studied. We're dealing with hard things, this idea of servitude. And of course, I think the worst by far is the idea of involuntary slavery. Some of us may think in the United States we definitely had a very ugly period of involuntary slavery. There's no getting around that. But that's true in world history. The sad thing, when I was doing some research on this, it's not just history. It's not just ancient Rome. It's not just old U.S. history. It's even modern-day world in different ways, in different countries, in different contexts. We can think about the idea of a person being trafficked. There's people who have to do very bad things with regard to being enslaved, and that is a sad, sad, sad part sometimes of the human condition. Now, there have been times when there's been indentured servitude where people maybe chose to enter into a contract, maybe not a good contract, to get money or to get travel or to get in, they had to serve out 7 years or a period of service to kind of earn their way, often not on good terms at all, not fair. I think of doing a little research in the medieval period, the Middle Ages, and the whole idea of feudal lords and the serfs and the peasants who had to work the land and pay very high taxes and other things to those that were the hierarchy. Think about even, being honest, in my own ancestry DNA or looking at family history, we've had sharecroppers. Maybe we wouldn't call them slaves, but they worked under very harsh conditions. And people even like in Appalachia, coal mines, people have had, maybe we don't think of them in the same way. I know these are different contexts of the ways that people in time, throughout time, through different geographic regions, through different things, have had to have very difficult times of service. Let's go into the much more the immediate context. So let's think about the time of this writing and who Paul's audience was. So I'm not saying these numbers are perfect. I tried to research it. Probably there was around 10 million individuals at the time of this writing who were in some form on that scale serving in the Roman Empire. So, and it could have been a pretty high percentage of the population. I think the point being, not just here in 1 Timothy, but in other places, this is something the audience could identify with. And what you will see when you study it in the Bible are the term servant and bondservant. Now, the term bondservant in the Greek is the term doulos. And it was someone, try to get it as accurate as we can, because it's important. They were under the authority, that is, they were subservient to someone over them called the master. But I wouldn't want you to think of it as modern day slavery, as somebody captured, put into this type. We might have these different images here. In many cases, and I'm not trying to make it sound like it's some great thing, but they did receive pay. They were entitled to buy their freedom. They often were given positions of great responsibility, stewardship of money, property. We see the first usage in 1 Corinthians 7:21, and we also see Jesus in various ways teaching parables about the master of the house or about the steward who managed the master's resources and things. Now, none of this ever, ever, ever should be used to say that it was condoned by the Bible or encouraged. People that have used that out of context, that's not good. In fact, just to be clear, we didn't really dig into it that much at the time, but at the beginning of this very letter in 1 Timothy 1:10, there's a list of those that have done evil things, including murderers, and in that list are those who are enslavers. So somebody who literally enslaves someone, it's not good. We see the terrible example recorded throughout the book of Exodus of Israel being themselves in bondage and slavery to Pharaoh. So one thing is absolutely clear. As part that the facts are recorded, whether it was Israel and Pharaoh or whether it was recorded in other ways, and even Jesus knew it was part of the system, but it is not something to be condoned. And in the interest of time, I just wanted to show you some of the other passages that use the term bondservant. If you wanted to research it further, this is not the only use of it. But let's come back to our passage now that we've had a little further context and reflection. Let those who are under a yoke. A yoke is a heavy thing on your neck and back. Oxen can have yoke. A yoke is a heavy burden. So it's an acknowledgement. This can be a yoke. This can be not an easy thing. This can be a hard thing. And it says to show honor to the masters. And that can be very hard. And it says even that some were believing masters. But again, I'm in no way condoning all this. We're talking about the facts. But I do want to understand, the slavery context here was different than we might think of it in our own country or in other ways. But I'm still not saying it's good. It was a hard, very, very, very tough thing. And it says, serve all the better, since those who benefit by their good service are believers and beloved. And you know what? Again, It's not light. It's not easy. This is a challenging thing to do. And I think, how do we even apply this today? How do we think about even the broader context of it? Often in history or today, there are bad systems that we are dealt with, and we operate the best we can under a very, to say the least, imperfect system. Let's think about it a little further. Thinking about it even back then, but also maybe even a little bit more applicable today from Romans 13. Think about being under the yoke or the subjected at times. Think about your lifetime to governing authorities you may not agree with. Maybe it's now, maybe it was in the past. But maybe you were subject to an authority over you, just like in this case the bondservant had somebody over them making decisions affecting their life. And at times we have people who have authority over us. Now let's make something clear. Whether it was those masters then or whether it's a governing authority today, it's not that God chose them. The system was allowed, just like the rulers. There's been a lot of bad rulers throughout human history, but they are allowed for a time. They were chosen for a time. And Jesus even said, you got to render to Caesar's what is Caesar's. Not that Caesar's always good. Not that a master is always good. Not that the whole system is even good. But going on in the context of this passage, it says here, therefore it must be in subjection. This is now talking about us all to those authorities in our life. Even the ones we disagree with, even when it's hard. Not only to avoid God's wrath, but for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes. For the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. So pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes. You don't agree with it, but you're subjected to that. Revenue. Respect. That's what, by the way, that's what it's talking about here. To show honor, respect. You're subjected to it. It can be a very hard thing to do. Honor to whom honor is owed. And yeah, it's not like I'm going to sugarcoat it and say this is a good thing. Sometimes we have to operate and hold our testimony despite the circumstances that we're in. And this has affected us in many different contexts. Now, what I really want to conclude with is some final broader thoughts about servitude beyond just the immediate context. Because let's be honest, nobody likes this. It's a very unusual way to think about it. But think about what Now, Paul had a pedigree. Paul had had positions of authority or power. Yet the term he used for himself frequently was servant or bondservant. That's how he identified, not his titles, not his authority, not his positions. He wasn't alone. If you read the beginning of how James introduces himself, he calls himself a bondservant in James 1:1. Peter in 2 Peter 1:1 calls himself a bondservant. Jude in 1:1, because he calls himself a bondservant, they were identifying as servants. Think about how people use their titles and positions today. This is extremely contrarian thinking. They give discourses about serving rather than being served. And I want to just conclude with this one from Jesus himself in Matthew 20, verse 25. So his disciples were arguing who is going to have the greatest position and title, like we often do, don't we? But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. And hasn't that always been true? Isn't that the human condition? Whether they're called it or not, people want to be the master. People want to be in charge. They want to have people serving under them. And even though it's a completely different context, even in a workplace, there are those that lord it over them. There are government rulers that can lord it over them. And it's happened in times past. It can happen It will probably happen, as long as we're on this earth. And it was true at the time of Jesus. It was true at the time of Paul. But he says, it shall not be so amongst you. And this is our attitude change. Nobody's condoning the system that's out there. But he says, but whoever would be great amongst you must be your servant. And whoever would be first amongst you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So I think Jesus came, he should have been on a throne, everybody should have been serving him. He's so different from every human leader. He was transformative. I mean, what a way to think. This is not easy, guys. It's not easy for me to think about. But if we'd say, I'm willing to be a bondservant, I'm willing to put other people first, that's a challenging thought. It's a challenging passage. Again, I try to do my best with it. It's not easy. I encourage you to think about it, reflect upon it yourself. Look at the passage, think about it. But most of all, think about what the apostles themselves did, and most of all, think about what Jesus himself did. And while it is incredibly difficult, let's not let the human leaders be our example. Let's let what Jesus taught us be our example.